Something has gone terribly wrong. John Dankosky is not hosting the show today. He's been going through some really tough times with the last season of Game of Thrones. He finally came to us yesterday and said, I'm just so worried about the Khaleesi. I need some time to process. So we're giving him that time. This is Colin McEnroe. I'm jumping in here and doing my usual inadequate but spirited job. And let me tell you who's in the house today with us. Daniela Altamari, State House reporter for the Hartford Courant. Mark Pazniokis, Capitol Bureau Chief at the Connecticut Mirror. And you'd think this would be the easy part that I could get through without stumbling. Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Hartford. Go Hawks. The cameras of CTN are also with us today, which means that we'll be on CTN. We're not live, though, right? You're taping this, right? Yeah, we're not live. I think we follow, they've got a new project with Dick Wolf called Tong and Order. It's a crime series, and I think we're going to be on right after that. So we're going to, a little bit later in the show, talk, in fact, about Attorney General William Tong and his role in going after the opioid crisis. We'll also talk about the police shootings that are in the news. But we're going to start with what else is there to talk about? Ned Lamont. And to begin, I think we'll talk about the fact that Ned Lamont, at his own prompting, has occasioned an assessment, a detailed assessment of his first 100 days in office. And Paz, I do get the sense going back through all of the, before all of the articles and before all of the appearances on Sunday morning TV shows and stuff like that, it really was kind of Ned Lamont's idea, in my recollection anyway, that it would be good to have a 100-day assessment of his reign.
Hell yes. I am unaware of any reporter at the Capitol who woke up one day and said, you know what, we're going to hold this guy to the standard of the magical 100 days, made famous by FDR. Mm-hmm. Kind of a high bar to reach in that case. The question is, what possessed them to say, okay, we're going to invite this review at this point? And in fairness to the governor, in very few cases does a governor really have any record of achievement in his first 100 days. In fact, in part, in large measure, I should say, because a governor is inevitably tethered to the Connecticut General Assembly. In the Connecticut General Assembly, there's a certain rhythm to its annual session, and nothing much happens before May. There is a committee process. There's a lot of work going on. Some of it behind the scenes, some of it in public hearings, and just sort of in the machinery of legislating. So to me, it was kind of an odd thing to do. I think they're trying to set a tone of their broad aspirations for how to remake government. They had a cabinet meeting the other day in which they announced that they have a chief performance officer who is tasked with trying to make this a more customer-friendly government, one of the many hyphenated words they used. Everything was consumer-driven, efficiency-driven, so forth and so on. So anyway, yeah, I'm not quite sure why they're putting this push on at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Daniela, really, in some ways, the game is really just about to start. I mean, they kind of pick their team in the first 100 days, but they're really about to start playing on the true playing field pretty much now, not during these preceding 100 days.
Yeah, I mean, the governor mentioned that the other day when he said, he had to, he basically won the election, had to set up a government and, do it all during the holidays. So, it was really hard sort of just starting out, and then, you get into office, you get sworn in, and as Paz said, you've got to sort of wait around for the legislature. But, he did, before he took over, before the inauguration, he put out convened a series of transition advisory groups, and they each laid out on various topics from, criminal justice to transportation to, healthcare, anything that state government deals with. They sort of set out and said, what can we do in the first 100 days? And even the so-called easy things to do, such as reopening the rest areas on the state highways 24/7, they couldn't do or they haven't done. And that was listed in one of the transition documents as this is an easy, quick win. We could do this, right away. And I think they've discovered that it's hard to do anything right away in government.
Yeah, and I don't know. I watched the thing that they convened. I think it's Central Connecticut State University, where they had, I think, some of the people from the advisory groups. But it really kind of closely resembled the kind of press conference that we're very familiar with from the Capitol, where everybody stands up there congratulating everybody else for whatever has just happened and saying, no, well, it really wouldn't have been possible without you, Pauline. We never could have gotten it done. And there's sort of that tone there. And meanwhile, Bilal, it seems to me like the public and the press, too, is still trying to get a read. Like, who is this guy? Is he here to help us? Is he here to help his friends in Greenwich? Is he here to tilt policies more in favor of the business community? I mean, this 100-day self-assessment could be an interesting time to find that out. I'm not sure we did, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure this 100-day idea is a good way, as Paz has mentioned already, to sort of measure what goes on at the state level, especially because the state legislature really doesn't get much done until, the wee hours of the night, the day before the session actually comes to a close. But I think what's intriguing to me about what's happened since the governor's taken office is really this question of what would a governor who comes out of the private sector look like? What would his vision for the state look like? I think if you sort of read through all of this, one of the things that jumps out to me is that Lamont is clearly trying to move the state in a direction where government can be run more like a business. I think some of the language being used about efficiency, for example, and using of technology to try to sort of streamline services, to put things online. So clearly he has a vision of the state that really is one that he wants to model after running the business. The other thing that's intriguing to me is the sort of nature of the conflict that's emerging within the party between Lamont and particularly some of the more progressive lawmakers in the legislature, tension over taxes, tension over tolls. So I think the next 100 days might be more interesting than the first 100 days in that sense.
Great segue to where we were going to go. So, yeah, Paz, really this will be maybe the first real big fight is going to be over what some of the leaders of the legislature think. I mean, Lamont has mostly thought about revenue in terms of either tolls or ways of expanding the sales tax. Now he's going to have a fight on his hands, it looks like, as leadership is interested in at least talking about capital gains taxes. Set the stage for that.
So there's a push among Democratic legislators to change the income tax rate on capital gains only, and only as it applies to the wealthiest households. So you're talking about single filers who make more than $500,000 a year and married couples who make more than $1 million a year. The governor has said he is adamantly opposed to doing this. But one of the open questions about Governor Lamont so far is when he says something like that, is he really drawing a bright line? Is he really saying, if you go down this road, I will veto a budget? And that is one of the biggest unanswered questions at the General Assembly right now is where are the hard lines for this administration? They've sketched out a few, but this is very important to how the rest of the session will go. By the way, it's not the next 100 days. There are 42 days left in this session starting today, assuming they can get a budget done on time. And then
that's a big assumption.
That's a big assumption. But so it involves policy and also the personality of Ned Lamont and his administration. Are they ready to play hardball on certain issues? Because that will determine whether or not a budget comes into focus. In the House of Representatives in particular, they really need some hard lines to play against when you're trying to get a majority when you in a caucus with 90 members. The magic number is 76, and when you're doing a budget, you'd like to have a couple extra.
Yeah. So, Daniela, I think the capital gains thing it has both substantive and structural importance and symbolic importance, too. I mean, there's a way in which when you go to the unions, the state employees unions, and ask them to go back to the bargaining table and make sacrifices, when you talk about expansion of sales tax burdens into other sectors, people do sort of say, well, what about all the rich people? Is it really the plan here to safeguard them entirely, to put them in kind of an untouchable category where we're not only billionaire friendly, but we're 100 millionaire friendly? And I feel like the capital gains tax is sort of a stand-in for that question.
Yeah, I mean, this is the central debate in the Democratic Party right now, nationally as well, right? I mean, you have Elizabeth Warren talking about forgiving college debt and taxing the rich, and this is, sort of the thing that we're going to be hearing a lot about in the next couple of years. In the legislature, you have a group of progressive Democrats who came into office in November, or I guess in January, but they were elected in November. And, they're ready for this fight. They want this fight. They are looking at the governor's budget where he wants to put in tolls. He wants to put in taxes on things like sugary drinks that could hurt people perhaps on the lower level of the income scale a little bit harder. And they're saying, wait a minute, what about the rich guys? When are they going to step up? So I think Paz is right. This is going to be the battle that defines the next 42 days.
And Connecticut is kind of in a fragile spot to have this debate because Connecticut is always looking at New York, to a lesser extent Massachusetts, about competitiveness. And Connecticut right now, even though people here certainly have the opinion that taxes are too high, they're still lower than in New York. If you go to right now, the top range on the income tax is 6.99%. If you add 2 points for these wealthy earners, you'd have a capital gains rate of 8.99. In New York, it's at 8.8 thereabouts for higher earners. So you get to the point where are you risking pushing people across the border to New York, if not further south to places where there's no income tax? There's a great debate about how real a risk is of driving the wealthy from the state. Some of it's myth, some of it's reality, but part of the reality is there's a lot of tax money raised from a small amount of people in Fairfield County. And if you lose a few of them, it undercuts what you're trying to do. You're trying to raise another $200 million with this capital gains tax. If you drive a number of them south, you're not going to hit that $200 million figure.
Of course, Bilal, a lot of these goals are in opposition to one another. I mean, another objective that government has here in Connecticut is to make the place an attractive place for a new generation of people to come to. So you want millennials to either stay in Connecticut after they finish college or come to Connecticut even if they're not from here. And if what they see is that they're bearing a disproportionate burden of the cost of public services, that's kind of a turnoff.
And I think you're really tapping into what I think is the larger and more important point. I think, often this discussion, gets centered on what are the sort of needs and interests of the wealthy, and will they stay in the state or will they abandon the state if their taxes go up? But I think the larger question is, what kind of state are we living in, and what kind of state do we want to live in? And I think the question of what is a more equitable tax system in the state, we know that nationally wealth inequality has been growing. It's growing right here in the state. We know that wealthy people have benefited tremendously over the last few decades, that a lot more of their wealth is not generated through checks, but generated through capital gains and generated through profits and really wealth accumulation and not income in the traditional way. And I think, no matter how you talk about it, raising the sales tax is a regressive way to raise taxes in the state. It will burden lower class people, working class people, middle class people more. And in fact, what the state really has a problem with right now are middle income people who are deciding to move to places like Florida and South Carolina because their property taxes are so high in the state and because they feel like they are being burdened with a great deal of taxes. And as you alluded to, the idea that if we want to maintain young people in this state, we need to make this state a place that's more livable. We need to deal with issues like affordable housing. We need to deal with other kinds of issues that affect them more, because I think the life of this state going into the future will depend more on them than it will depend necessarily on whether we're able to keep a billionaire in the state or not, even though Paz's point about how much we collect taxes for them, I think, is an important point.
So speaking of getting people to come here, this is a relatively trivial question, although it's not cheap. I mean, these tourism campaigns tend to cost $20 million to like put at least a whole new package together. But Daniela, I've known since before he was sworn in that Ned Lamont in particular did not like the tourism slogan, still revolutionary. And he's spoken out against it repeatedly. I think I first heard him do it on Face the State before he even was sworn in as governor, that he thought it was a dumb slogan. And this has been sort of kicking around for a while, and he's said it again. I've often thought that everybody's saying what should be the motto of the state, revolutionary, really, still. Now, on the other hand, what he offered up as a replacement was, how about the education state? Which is definitely going to, kids are going to be begging their parents, can we please take our summer vacation in the education state? I don't know. What do you make of all this?
I don't know how that works as a tourism slogan. You could use that as a marketing tool to get businesses to come to the state. That may work.
Yeah.
They may be interested in a highly skilled and trained and educated workforce. But you're right. I don't see the average person living in New Jersey, hey, let's go take a vacation in the education state. We could tour a bunch of college campuses and maybe visit a kindergarten classroom. I don't quite understand it.
No, that's not a good one. But Paz, the other thing is, we've seen over the years what's really happened here, which is you could have a worse slogan than still revolutionary. You could have a better slogan than still revolutionary. But if you don't fund these activities, if you don't have a robust budget for creating tourism, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, I think our attention and the state's attention at time is misplaced. With the exception, perhaps, of the I Love New York campaign, I've never really seen a motto that has grabbed me. So, my advice to the state would be just forget about the motto. But the marketing is important. Mm-hmm. There are things here that you can market and sell. And there's no question when you cut your marketing budget, tourism goes down. Tourism is an important industry in Connecticut, throughout the rest of New England. You certainly can get overnight visitors and day visitors from within New England and around. But yeah, that's the Department of Economic and Community Development has a lot on its plate right now on how to attract employers and jobs and also work with the tourism industry. I think the governor, I would say respectfully, should leave the question of a motto to others. If not, just skip the motto and go to selling, some of the things we have here, places to visit and things to do.
Actually, Bilal, I think still revolutionary is kind of a good motto. And God, nobody could have been more enamored, at least temporarily, of the musical Hamilton than Ned Lamont. I'm surprised he doesn't like it.
The first time I read that, I thought to myself, first, I didn't know that was the motto. The second point was, what the heck is that motto about? Became the second question for me. I think certainly, one of the things, I've been in Connecticut now since 1995. I've actually spent more time here than I spent in the state I grew up in, which is Michigan. And so for me, part of the attractiveness of Connecticut has been its proximity to Boston, its proximity to New York. There are certainly lots of things within the state to do really interesting things. There's a great musical scene. I'm a big fan of jazz, and I'm able to hear jazz not only at the University of Hartford, but there are great venues within the state to hear jazz. There are other forms of, entertainment in the state. So I think there are a lot of things that could really, work to the state's advantage in terms of attracting people to be here. And I'm not quite sure what that model
CTN, are you filming this, CTN? Are you filming this? Just cut that part and send it to Lamont. There's your tourism commercial right there. All right, we have to take a break anyway, so we'll have time to talk about Attorney General William Tong and the Sackler family. We are back. We are back with Mark Pazniokis from the Connecticut Mirror, Daniela Altamari from the Hartford Courant, Bilal Siku from the University of Hartford Political Science Department. And so, Daniela, I'm going to have you kind of kick this topic off, the problem of opioid addiction and the role that Purdue Pharma has played in marketing aggressively and sometimes deceptively its products to people. It's been around for decades now, but it's really kind of come to a high boil here, and our Attorney General, William Tong, jumped into it in a very specific way this week. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so back in December, Attorney General Tong's predecessor, George Jepsen, was among the state attorneys general. Many have done this, filing lawsuits against Purdue Pharma, the company that manufactured and marketed OxyContin, for their role in the opioid epidemic. And this week, Attorney General Tong, who took over the office from Jepsen, filed an amended complaint with more details and some additional charges against some new defendants on this lawsuit against both Purdue Pharma, some of its officers, and the family that founded and controls it, the Sackler family, incredibly wealthy family. The company is based in Stamford, Connecticut, which happens to be William Tong's hometown, or not hometown, but town where he lives now. And the details outlined in this amended complaint mirror the allegations made by Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey earlier this year, where this portrait emerges of a company that really recklessly and deceptively marketed these drugs as, effective for minor pain, non-addictive. They targeted high-prescribing doctors. I mean, it's a catalog of very troubling allegations.
Well, and Paz, one of the new concerns, it seems to be that they're going to try to hide the money.
Yeah.
That they're going to try to move the money around so that they don't get hit with fines.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly what it is. It is they're in a race with the Sackler family to bankruptcy court. Mm-hmm. They are trying to claw back is much of the money that was paid to the Sackler family before this company files for bankruptcy. There seems to be, I mean, the company has certainly hinted at that. They don't need to hint at that. When you see a company that is under siege in 34, 35 states around the country, it's only a matter of time before they're going to seek the protection of the bankruptcy court, much as the way we saw years ago with asbestos, insulation companies. So I think that's what William Tong was doing with this amended complaint. Jepsen kind of teed it up in December. And actually the filing, it was his last week in office, January 2nd. Happy New Year, Sacklers. But yeah, this is about, again, trying to claw back some of that money. The lawsuit spells out the hundreds of millions of dollars annually that was being paid out to the Sacklers either directly or through some associated companies. So that's what this development is about.
Right. Bilal, one thing that I've been thinking about, so Purdue was getting fined in the hundreds of millions of dollars for this stuff more than a decade ago. In 2007, I think they got hit with at least one fine of $600 million. So that tells me, in the ensuing 12 years, a lot of people have gotten addicted, a lot of people have died. And just now we're starting to talk about bankruptcy. It tells me that our societal understanding of fines is off a little bit, that for a lot of what seem to be huge fines to you and me, big companies often say, well, that's a reasonable cost of doing business. Yes, we will pay the $600 million fine and then continue doing exactly what we've been doing.
Absolutely. But, for me, this story reminds me. I grew up in Detroit, and in the 1980s, I witnessed the explosion of the crack cocaine epidemic in Detroit. And, of course, it spread across the nation. And as I read more and more about Purdue, what I thought I was reading about was some sort of drug gang that was operating like you would see in some inner city community. What they did was beyond despicable. I mean, no matter how you sort of describe it. And as I said, it operated like a drug game. When you think about street-level drug dealers, right, they get out there and they try to promote their product versus their competitors' products. And part of their promotion is how potent their product is. And if they're selling the best stuff on the streets, people buy it. They often give it away to potential customers in order to hook them and to lure them in. these are the kind of activities that Purdue was doing with doctors. They worry about how they can make their profits. They have no concern about the impact of their drugs on the people who are drug addicts. What their bottom line is, how do we make money? In fact, they look at the drug addicts and they sort of ridicule them and look down at them for being drug addicts. You read some of the documents coming from the Sackler family in Purdue. They talk the same way about the people who become hooked on OxyContin. So to me, this was more like a criminal gang. And in fact, when we talk about even clawing back, to me, they need to do exactly what they do with criminal drug organizations. They seize property. They take boats. They take houses. They bring that company down because, the damage that this, effort that they engaged in over the last couple of decades or so or less has just been profound. And so to me, they operate more like a criminal organization and a corporate suite than a pharmaceutical company.
There is a parallel, I think, to drug gangs, in particular crack. Crack was a matter of people figuring out how to make cocaine affordable to the masses, how to get it at a price point. And really, I mean, it was the street criminals who were doing this. Many of them were brilliant marketers. I'm serious.
Absolutely.
I as a federal court reporter, I covered some extensive trials. And these trials, if anybody who's seen the first season of The Wire, you would understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking about The Wire too. The difference is that just the number's just a lot bigger because you cannot have insurance reimburse you for your crack purchase. So the numbers here are astronomical. Hey, we have to take a quick break here, and what's going to happen is some nice people are going to ask you to support public radio. And if you do it during the Wheelhouse, that means you like the Wheelhouse, and the Wheelhouse people will be even happier with the Wheelhouse here at this station than I'm hoping they already are. And you can also type in the message field, when is John coming back? So I just want to mention that not only is John unavailable today, and so you have me, an inadequate replacement for him, but we have a more than adequate replacement for our usual producer, Scott Breedy, who's also off. The big kid, Katie Tolarski, who is the capo di tutti capi here. I don't think that's her actual official public radio title, but it serves its purpose. Anyway, she's actually produced the Wheelhouse today. Wolfie's on the board as usual, and thanks to everybody else who helped out here in one way or another. So this is the Wheelhouse, and Mark Pazniokis and Daniela Altamare and Bilal Siku are with us, and the cameras of CTN are recording us today. We are going to be in prime time right after or before the new crime hit Tong and Order. All right, a little bit more serious here. It's almost inescapable now in Connecticut news over the last week and a half or so to talk about the two police shootings. There's two mistakes I want us to not make, and I'm going to make sure that we don't, although all the people here would also have the same caution. One of them is these are two different incidents. They share some things in common, but the Hamden incident is different from the Wethersfield incident, both in terms of the level of tragedy, of outcome, and just how the whole thing unfolded. And I think it's a mistake that people sometimes make to conflate two very different things. The other thing is we don't yet have all the facts on either incident. So there's a sense in which we have to proceed with a certain amount of caution in talking about it. On the other hand, it's just so much dominating the conversation right now. I don't think we can entirely avoid it. So, Paz, one of the things that we talk about here on this show is public policy. But these two incidents, because of the chaos involved in each one, because of the human factor, because of problems like officers in hot pursuit not turning on their body cams, it does raise questions about how much can you fix with policy?
No, exactly. The Connecticut General Assembly has weighed in on this several times, and they've done what they could. The idea of encouraging accountability. Accountability was the word that was used over and over again the year that the legislature passed legislation that encourages but does not require police departments to equip their officers with body cams. Dash cams have been standard for quite a while. And the other area of policy setting, though, is at the police departments themselves. And one of the things I am unsure of at this point is do the Wethersfield police, as well as the Hamden police, have a policy about firing into moving vehicles? This has been an area that's been well studied by police experts over the years. NYPD in the early 1970s decided to prohibit their officers from firing at moving vehicles. And what they found was deadly force incidents within 2 years, dropped in half. And that involved fatalities to people the police were intending to shoot as well as bystanders. The thought behind that is there are any number of things that can happen when you shoot a driver, and few of them are good. You are not necessarily going to neutralize that motor vehicle as a threat to the police and public. So that'll be something that I'm sure will come out in the coming days and weeks about what was the training, what were the policies in Wethersfield, where an 18-year-old was shot and killed while police said he was driving at the police, and then the other one over the city line into New Haven, where a Hamden police officer, assisted by a Yale police officer, fired into a car as well.
I mean, it may be a coincidence, but a lot of these things so close together, April 16th and then on April 20th. One of these is in many ways too many. I don't know. Do we know enough to be able to say affirmative or negative things at this point?
Yeah, I think at this point we are, trying to really collect the sort of information we need to really know what happened exactly, and I think, from that standpoint that there are still lots of question marks that are out there. I think, for me, what is sort of a part of this moment, and we have these kind of moments far too often in our country, is that it really sort of brings to the surface, I think, the sort of continuing tensions between law enforcement and communities of color, especially around these kinds of issues. I think the broader sort of problem of over-policing in communities of color that go on, that sometimes provides the sort of foundation for this tension that goes on. Certainly the shooting of unarmed individuals, both women and men in the Black and Latino community, as well, sort of triggers a lot of this. But I think it really points to this sort of longstanding tension that exists within communities. And I think, we have tried a range of solutions, whether it's, additional training and, what are the conditions in which police officers can or cannot use lethal force. I've always acknowledged that it's a really difficult job. I think that police officers do. But at the same time, they need better training, and they need a better sort of understanding of when to use lethal force and when not to use lethal force. And, again, my heart goes out to the families that have to experience these kinds of tragedies and the difficulties of trying to figure out what happened and how to fix it.
And we should point out that in the New Haven case, the driver was unarmed, but the police report that went out over the air was this was somebody who was armed. And now the person who had called 911 and reported an attempted robbery and said he saw the guy with a gun, now he's saying, well, though he acted in a way that he thought he had a gun. And that goes to how Connecticut law is, and law is almost everywhere, which is the cop does not have to be correct. He has to have a reasonable basis for a thing. And again, that is not me defending what he did, because the video is pretty startling. I mean, he shot through a closed window twice into a car, and it was unclear how clearly a view did he have? What did he think he saw in that moment? We don't know yet. But again, that goes back to my original point about why a lot of police departments have said this is bad tactics to be shooting through a closed window into a police car, into a moving car or a car that has just come to a stop.
Yeah, I mean, Daniela, one thing that a lot of families of color did was try to train their kids, so don't run away, keep your hands inside, speak respectfully, make eye contact, I mean, I was raising a son of color and we had this up on our refrigerator. But, there are other incidents. I mean, in the Hamden one, most of the rules seem to have been followed. As Paz is saying, they didn't have a gun. The report of an armed robbery was an overstatement. They seemed to be trying to get out of the car with their hands up. And it still, 22-year-old Stephanie Washington wound up in the hospital with, I think, multiple gunshot wounds. I think she's going to be okay, but there's nothing easy about getting shot and having to go to the hospital. That's still a pretty major thing to happen to a very innocent passenger in a car.
Yeah, I think Professor Succo is right that we just don't know enough of the facts really surrounding either of these cases. But, it's heartbreaking. And you're right. I mean, parents of color have to have this tough conversation with their kids. And, what does that say about America today? I mean, that's pretty discouraging.
Well, if you have the conversation and it still doesn't work,
right.
That's
even more.
That's the even bigger problem,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, for me, as a black man who sort of drives through a lot of different towns here in Connecticut, for me, whenever I see the police, there is this sort of tension that raises up in me because there is a real worry about being pulled over by the police just on the suspicion that I don't belong in this area that I'm driving in. At least that's what their belief is. And so for me, part of why that tension occurs is because I just have a very keen understanding that something quite routine can go very, very wrong very, very quickly. I've been pulled over by police on several occasions, and so some would say to me, was I scared? And my normal reaction is, well, I'm not worried about how I feel. My concern is about how they feel. And if they come up and if they're nervous because they're looking at a black man and I'm probably about 5'8.5", 5'9". I probably in that car look like I'm about 6'4". Probably look like I weigh about 350 pounds. And what that means is that any sort of slight movement on my part could result in something quite terrible happening to me. And so that's the reality that I think that many black people, particularly black men, live with in this country when they have these interactions with the police. And so I'm hopeful that we can sort of figure out some way out of this and how to resolve these kinds of problems. My sense is that the sort of deeper sort of issues around race and class that exist in our society makes a real solution to these kinds of problems very difficult to come about.
All right, I think we'll stop it there. What we typically do towards the end is just sort of for a change of pace. We in the grand tradition of Festivus, we suggest to our panelists that they bring in either a feat of strength that someone has committed or that they air a grievance. And so, Daniela, you can get us started. What have you got for us?
Well, I have 3.
Wow.
But I'll be quick. Everyone's talking about Game of Thrones, but the final season of Veep is so great, and everyone should watch it.
Could you actually? That was going to be one of my feats of strength too. So let's pause here and say what are the so Veep, in which it is a farce, and everybody in it is completely horrible, and there are no redeeming people in it whatsoever. But I think one thing that they've done that's very interesting is introduce in this season, for farcical purposes, a foreign country actually meddling in the election. Mm-hmm. So Selena Meyer, the character played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is getting money from the Chinese government and getting other kinds of help from the Chinese government. And for people who couldn't wrap their minds around the Russian interference, it's a pretty interesting way to see it. Anyway,
it's just great. The second one is the story that is in the New York Times Magazine about an unbelievable case involving sexual harassment, sex discrimination, really even sexual abuse, involving the chain that owns Kay Jeweler and Jared Jewelers. This is a case that's been going on for something like 14 years. It is infuriating and horrifying, and the story is just fantastic. So I definitely recommend people read that. And then the third thing is just there was a killing last week of a reporter in Northern Ireland, and she had 29-year-old reporter, really brilliant woman, Lyra McKee, and she had written a piece. She was a gay woman. She had written a piece that ran, I think, in The Guardian a couple of years ago. It was a letter to her 14-year-old self, and it's really powerful and moving, and I definitely would recommend people read that. It's really quite incredible and gives you a sense of what was lost when she was murdered.
All right, a Festivus hat trick. Paz, what have you got?
I think I just wanted to note the passing of William Pape, the former publisher of the Waterbury Republican American. I'm guessing Mr. Pape was not a listener of WNPR.
Yeah, probably not.
He, when he was the editorial page editor, certainly oversaw the most conservative editorial page in Connecticut. But it should be noted that Connecticut still has a couple of papers that are owned by families. They're doing their best to cover their local communities. So, again, I just wanted to note his passing. It is still a family-owned paper, and they're hanging in there.
Yeah, I mean, the position of the editorial page there for many years was anti-communist when basically there wasn't any communist threat left. But maybe they just saw all this socialist stuff coming.
No, they drove all the communists out of Waterbury.
Yeah,
they were
that's what
successful.
it was. Okay, they were successful. All right. Bilal, what have you got for
Actually,
us?
two quick things. Yeah. One, I want to congratulate the women and men of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union in their very important victory against Stop and Shop. The workers held strong, and also equally impressive was the fact that customers honored the picket lines and actually didn't shop or try to shop at Stop and Shop. And so in many ways, I think this is an important victory. We don't hear about many victories by private sector labor unions. And so to see these workers, these women and men come together and go on strike and hold the line, I think is an important victory. The second thing for me is more of a downer. I've been following in the Current a number of articles about the problem of access to affordable, decent housing for many low-income people, especially people who are on Section 8. Hartford has the notoriety of having, I think it's 4 buildings within the last year or so that have actually lost their Section 8 status because of the horrible conditions that people are living under in those buildings, from problems like mold and faulty appliances to fire hazards, roaches, rodents, and other sort of problems. And so I think this is an important issue that needs a lot more attention than the attention it gets in the state, and also a lot more effort on the part of our lawmakers to help people have access to quality, affordable, decent housing in Connecticut.
All right, we're just about out of time before we ask you to support this station and this show. Daniela stole one of my Festivus things, but I'll quickly tell you about Reply All, which is a really interesting podcast about the internet, and search for the long distance call episode in which phone scammers from India engage with the hosts of this show in a way that I have absolutely I've never seen anything like it before or heard anything like it. That's all I have time to tell you about, but it's called Reply All. And please do heed the call and help support the Wheelhouse.